I'm some random guy on the internet, and if you're here, you're probably either someone that wants vindication for thinking the Final Fantasy VII Remake is terrible schlock, or you're a fan of Nomura's latest game and looking for reasons why old man babies are bitter. But which is it? Did Nomura make another 10 out of 10 masterpiece? Or a time ghost, the Citizen Kane mirror shot of Bishi Pretty Boy Sad Time? As one of those self proclaimed neckbeard anime fans who played the original as a dumb kid and has since played other Final Fantasies as a dumb, slightly older kid, I'm going to focus on what may very well become the face of a series near and dear to my heart. After all,
It's not as if another series hasn't gotten its own facelift of questionable quality compared to the original.
anyone with even passing familiarity can tell you about how big of an influence Final Fantasy VII is. It was the first Final Fantasy to be in 3D, had a main character whose assholish nature and demeanor was a subversion from the general character writing that was seen in the JRPG genre, was heavily advertised in the West and a first for the series, and so on. It became and remains one of Square's biggest earners, holding the unenviable crown of most, and most garbage, sequels that range from pretty good to... It even got a for the time, visually impressive film called Advent Children, where the cast broods because someone ate all the Advent calendar chocolate. All of these are important factors when understanding just why Square Enix would decide to remake Final Fantasy VII. For years, they talked about and teased the possibility, testing the waters until the tension in the room was fit to burst more than Tifa out of her top. Final Fantasy VII had name recognition such that its big shocker moment is known by people who never even played a Final Fantasy game. Wait, sorry, I meant this image. Nah, I meant this one. All the elements that allowed it to become a household name meant that a remake of it would sell on that name alone, similar to the likes of other pop culture series like Star Wars, especially when you compare it to other JRPGs. But why now? I'm not a fly on the wall or secretly Nomura's hairdresser, so I can't tell you with any certainty. But after the financial failure of Final Fantasy XV coming off the heels of 13's abysmal showing, it definitely doesn't seem that the modern Square Enix was swimming in a Scrooge McDuck money pit. If there's one thing up their sleeve that was a break glass in case of emergency sort of deal, the FF7 remake would be it, given it's guaranteed to print money hand over fist on that name recognition alone. One of the main issues with the remake is its writing. At its core, for any story, the underlying aspect that is most critical is what I refer to as internal consistency. The idea that the details, character actions, motivations, the world itself all make sense as organic outgrowths of each other. So long as this internal consistency is maintained, the audience's suspension of disbelief will also be maintained. The more you bend that underlying foundation of a setting and its rules, the more a viewer or reader begins to be drawn out of the story. There are no rules that demand that a story of knights rooted in a dark medieval setting with moderate metallurgy capabilities and no electricity don't pull out semi-auto machine guns and begin riding cyborg pterosaurs. But there's a reason why it seems out of place. It's not internally consistent. So long as you establish rule of cool as part of the framework that underpins your entire work, you can go completely over the top without it seeming out of place, because it's consistent with the established rules of reality. Stories of fiction are bound by the rules of their world, just as we are ours. If I suddenly found that gravity wasn't a thing, or that trees all screamed and broke and finish at me, I'd think I'd gone crazy. Writing is, at its core, the establishment and adherence to these underlying rules of the world you establish, and a writer's competence is tied directly to this as a first test. So far I've discussed basic ideas and information that are universal, but from here on out, I'll need to be focusing on the plot of the original game as well as the remake. I don't want to ruin the stories for those who are interested in seeing them firsthand on their own initially. So, spoiler warning. To understand why fans of the original game may see the remake as flash without substance, one needs to understand the basic themes of Final Fantasy VII. Yes, on the surface, it is a fight against a cartoonishly evil company and their who goes there / the thing monster that wants to do mommy proud by killing everyone and LARPing as Kefka. But as with many stories,
Especially those that happen to have some kind of remake.
the plot itself is a way to more directly exacerbate factors that lead to specific kinds of characters, events, and settings that in turn allow for exploration of themes and ideas reliant on a hyperbolization to get to the level of stimulus required. Yes, Cloud is a random Shinra infantryman given main character levels of power due to being injected with Genova cells and given Mako treatments by Hojo, who has a broken mind over not becoming soldier as well as having PTSD given what happened to him prior to and immediately after Hojo's experiments. but those are just hyperbolic aspects that allow for a more direct application of the themes and tones his character embodies. Beneath all the JRPG plot reasoning, Cloud is a person living with a false persona who doesn't know who he is and has to grapple with losing his identity and reforming who he truly is. Red 13 is an incredibly long-living lion thing with Native American aesthetics that is one of the last of his kind and believes his father abandoned his tribe. Under that, he's a kid who believes his father abandoned his family and so has trust issues and struggles to see the value in family and others. As a note, having a loving adopted grandfather doesn't counter this. See real-world kids who've been raised by just their grandparents, thanks. Barrett's a brick shithouse with a gun for an arm who is misled by Shinra, leading, as far as he knows, to the death of his best friend and his own wife, the loss of his arm, and the destruction of his home that he's blamed for. Beneath the cool gun, he's a guy who struggled with the advent of new versus old and now has to grapple with anger being used and tossed aside for the sake of profit. Later on, he's someone that has to find a way to come to terms that the things he did, even if reasonable or, quote, for the greater good, quote, hurt and killed innocent people. As I always saw it, while Final Fantasy VII has Gnostic symbolism, the core of its writing thematically was all rooted in a postmodern industrialized society. All of the underlying personal issues of the cast are related to, if not direct outgrowths of living in a world where money and status reign, where bonds and intimacy are commodities to be bought, where identities and purpose are based on consumerism. It was a hyperbolic version of the shift to big cities that was increasing along with the dot-com bubble when the game came out. Cloud's issues of identity are universal. Anyone that's grown up understands the feeling of isolation and questions of who they are. It's incredibly common to have to leave your home to go elsewhere in search of work, even if it means discarding who you thought you were. The shift into the modern era has created an epidemic of broken homes, leaving ever more children feeling abandoned by their family just as Red was directly. People struggle with coping in anger, being wronged by things out of their hands, and are simply cogs to be used and thrown away in the pursuit of profits as Barrett was. People have to decide on whether telling what they think are white lies is better for themselves and appearances, as Tifa debated when she continually went along with Cloud's false memories. Reeve's conflict with his job at Shinra and his desire to help people, Yuffie's motivation at trying to help her people regain a sense of self and pride after the Wutai War, the shutdown of the space program's support of Cid's work, and Vincent's, less thematically and more directly, complete justing at the hands of Lucretia and Hojo. A common trend, highlighted when Cloud tells the group to go find a reason to fight, is the search for individual purpose and meaning, something that they all lost or that became occluded because of the mega corporation and its machinations. Their hunt for Sephiroth, and culmination with the decision to face him, knowing it won't stop Meteor, are the arcs of facing their issues and finding a way to live in a world without meaning. They do so by deciding that meaning for themselves. All of the themes of the characters' issues were reflections of issues of the human soul in late-stage capitalistic society. That's only become more apparent now, 30 years on. It's a large reason why the characters seem so human, because they're written as real people. Strip away the JRPG plot makeup, and the issues they have are the precise kinds of issues real people face in the consumerism-driven world. These human issues are natural outgrowths dependent on the setting and its players, like Shinra. You couldn't simply take Shinra and Sephiroth and drop them onto the plot of, say, Final Fantasy IV or X, and still have a cohesive narrative where character motivations are natural developments. Unfortunately, this leads directly into my major issue with the remake. It discards this natural outgrowth for a surface-level tacked-on message. The Time Ghosts are a direct and blatant way to crystallize the idea of destiny, making the game's message explicitly destiny. Not only do the Time Ghosts not exist as a natural part of the setting and world, but the message they embody was already extant in the original. No, Cloud didn't fight a giant Kingdom Hearts ghost that was called the Arbiter. Instead, he fought his own personal demons, as did the entire cast. Personifying destiny as some outside direct force on which you can place all your blame and issues is very much not fighting destiny in a human way. You cannot physically punch a pandemic, or societal weights that are pressing down on you. You can, however, face the parts of your personality that limit you. You can look yourself in the mirror and recognize all of your failures and your direct agency in them. That's what the original did. By finding their own reasons to live and facing Sephiroth, they had to face their failings and overcome their own self-imposed destiny. Unlike the ghosts, fighting Sephiroth wouldn't stop Meteor to their knowledge. They traveled to the North Crater regardless. That decision to continue to struggle hopelessly and hold on to their newfound ideals was them fighting against destiny. It was done in a far more human way than to literally fight the personification of an outside controlling force. Humans are shaped both by the inner and outer, nature and nurture. There are absolutely aspects of our situation that are out of our control. We can gnash our teeth, cry, shout in frustration. There's still nothing we can do to directly change that. However, we do have some control over our behaviors and ourselves. We can fight our vices no matter how small and be changed for it, and in so doing, change the course of our lives. Deciding not to drink so much, to stop playing so many video games and instead learn a skill, to use feelings of isolation as fuel, to force yourself to try and do better are all very possible. Our destiny is very much in our own control as well. That's what the original game highlighted. This top-down Ghost removes the human element from the characters and the way their personal growth and journeys could be mirrored from life. No longer are these real people taking charge over what they can in order to face that which they cannot. Now the demon is external. The penultimate challenge is not one of hopelessness where I'm girded by my own inner strength to face what I believe is certain death. There's now a direct outside threat independent of me that doesn't require my purpose, nor my growth, to challenge, and whose defeat offers me salvation from those inner demons. Everything's external. Self-analysis, that shit might give me some cognitive dissonance. Final Fantasy VII always had the Shinto in life, Buddhism in death approach to me. There were aspects of spirituality, but the life stream and divine were kept distinct and separate, things that were largely unknowable and unreachable by a living person. Sephiroth was linked to the material, and even after existing in the life stream, relied on it to become his god. He required usurpation of the divine to bridge that gap, and was not able to do so aside from manipulating divine's own natural flow to heal itself. He couldn't change its will, merely try to use that will for his own machinations. As I mentioned earlier, you couldn't drop Sephiroth and Meteor into Final Fantasy X, or Sin into Final Fantasy VII, without it feeling completely out of place, given that both are enemies born of their settings. That's not true of the Time Ghosts. They could easily be placed in any other series or game, and would fit exactly as they do in the remake, precisely because they are not based on the setting and so have no tie to it. They are frosting, and can be slathered onto any cake you want, since they're so surface level. The ending of the remake also allows for an alternate timeline Zack to live. An aspect of the original's purpose, as well as Crisis Core, was that time is limited. Eris dies, Dyne dies, Zack dies, Angel dies, and so on. That's what makes it so important to find a purpose you can believe in. You're gonna die, but to die for something you chased after mind, body, and soul is a death worth having. It's through the dead's sacrifice that the importance of life is highlighted, and the worth of living fully becomes clear. The memories of the past are imparted onto the survivors, and they become a weight that threatens to crush them, but through which they are tested and may grow. Letting Zack live, and potentially Eris, lessens the impact and importance of finding a will to live, because that will's already lessened out. One does not grow and become tempered unless they walk through the blackest night. It's easy to be optimistic and happy when life is good, or at least neutral. Losing those close to you will happen to everyone, if it hasn't already. That test to resolve is human. Being able to embrace the fleeting moments of peace and happiness with a melancholic joy at their impermanence is what it means to be mortal precisely because our time is limited. Having Zack survive removes yet another human element of Cloud, and makes his and Eris' fight against destiny and search for purpose all the lesser for its loss. No longer do we have to grapple with keeping our loved ones' memories alive through our own actions. Now their alternate timeline self can literally walk back in the front door. All in all, at least 90% of the remake is above average to great. The combat system was surprisingly addictive, visuals are stunning when they aren't being a literal JPEG skybox, Uematsu's music was top tier as always, and the rhythm game is, even if not fitting Cloud's personality at the time, so over the top that it's enjoyable, as is the case with most of the minigames. The extra bits of descriptions, like Shiva being the cause of the ice where Genova was sealed, is good, and helps to flesh out the world without being counter to already established facts. Showing Shinra personnel aside from Reeve being people who aren't cartoon villains, such as the doctors in Chapter 2 or the junior officer standing up to his superior to evacuate citizens, helps to round out Shinra more than the original did. Any of the new scenes that don't involve the new plot and time ghosts are charming. Every interaction Barrett has with or about Marlene is wonderful, as is his Chapter 14 personal scene. His Japanese VA really deserves a lot of credit for his subtle nuance. Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie are all given proper motivations and expansions. Red is canonically the best line ever when he does motorcycle stunts and rides a giant blade centipede. Even the underground lab section is fun and surprisingly tense. Uematsu hits it out of the park most of the time, and I'm still bitter that the corporate archives theme doesn't have a proper track listing. I never expected a one-to-one remake, and assumed they'd change numerous things to fit the compilation. What I didn't expect was for them to completely discard the postmodern consumerist Trials of the Soul and Purpose theme that gave the original its heart. Most importantly, we can now say with a 100% certainty that Eris canonically wears black panties, and that knowledge almost makes up for time ghosts. All in all, I give it 8 dolphin blows out of a pod. Would platinum it again, but doing those giant hands 3 times ever again. Maybe the team will surprise me and pull something out, but after Sephiroth made a giant Kingdom Hearts portal with his sword, I've got my doubts. Hopefully I'm wrong. Still, it's an overall good game, but the good is what was already there in the original. The most egregious fact is that the non-critical side parts and fluff are what were perfectly nailed, while the main theme and story, which could have genuinely remained untouched and been completely accepted by the consumers, completely fell apart by the end. If you enjoyed the remake and got something out of it, I'm not saying your experience is invalid, your opinion or relationship with any story is solely for you. I know that there are some stories that are terrible, that are guilty pleasures, that are near and dear to my heart, but that doesn't mean they're high quality, nor does it mean I can genuinely excuse their failings. You can and should be critical of something you love, no matter how pretty and dolled up it is at a glance. There's a lot more I had written that focused on individual issues and the kind of defense of them I'd seen, such as Red not being playable, or that because the original game still exists, the remake should try and do something different while also playing it safe by banking on the nostalgia that caused such a remake to be desired. This video's already gone on way too long. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a Tifa video to watch for a different kind of nostalgia.